Hello there, good evening everyone. This is Dari on WorldStreams Radio. Thank you to our listeners from all around the world for joining us tonight. And hello and welcome to our friends here in our virtual auditorium on paltalk.com. To learn more about WorldStreams Radio, visit our website at worldstreams.org. Our guest tonight is Dahr Jamail. Dahr Jamail is world-renowned for documenting the human cost of the Iraq War, the everyday violence and terror, the deterioration of the healthcare system, the shortages of clean water and the resulting rise in sickness, the lack of jobs, the refugee crisis, and the detention and torture of civilians and resistance fighters. Dahr has spent a total of 9 months in occupied Iraq as one of only a few independent U.S. journalists in the country. In addition, he has reported from Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, and extensively on veterans' resistance against the war. He currently writes for the Interpress service, Le Monde Diplomatique, and many other outlets. His stories have also been published by The Nation, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, Foreign Policy in Focus, and The Independent, just to name a few. Hello there, Saeed. Hello and welcome, Dahr.
Hello, good to be with you.
Well, hello there. Hello, Dari. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us, and good evening to you, Dahr Jamail. Thank you for being with us tonight. Dahr, the first casualty of war is often the truth. Can you, as a journalist, give us a self-critique and tell us what did the media do or did not do right as far as the war in Iraq is concerned?
Well, speaking specifically to the mainstream media in the United States, and with few exceptions aside, the mainstream media in this country made it possible for the Bush administration to sell the idea of the invasion and occupation of Iraq to the American people, basically based on the first reason being weapons of mass destruction. When that started to come up shy, i.e. no evidence, of course they used 9/11, connections with 9/11, of course when that came up shy, i.e. no evidence, then of course they settled with the final, we have to do this to liberate the Iraqi people. Also a reason just as bogus as the first two. So, the media in this country, again, with just few exceptions aside in the mainstream, it was almost a complicit, across the board, a complicity of the media that was acting more like state stenographers for the Bush administration than as journalists who were supposedly being watchdogs for the people and monitoring the centers of power. So, it was basically a total failure of journalism in this country in the mainstream that really made the invasion and occupation possible in the first place.
Well, how much of a role did the media play? And what comes to mind, for example, is actually this revered newspaper, the New York Times, also has, for some reason, some of the experts in the field, if you know what I'm referring to, the experts in the field have played the drum of war very much in a very consistent way. I'm not even referring to the Fox News of the world, because I don't really consider Fox News as a news organization. I consider it as a tabloid organization, but the CNNs, the New York Times, have really played a major role in actually segueing the United States into this war with Iraq.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and since you brought up the New York Times, I mean, the perfect example would be the one bogus story after another by so-called journalist Judith Miller, who actually does now work for Fox quote-unquote news. Judith Miller with one story after another of anonymous Bush administration official says this about WMDs. Anonymous Bush administration official says this. Just one baseless story after another, where she was literally getting, the New York Times giving her stories the headline space daily for these stories that were, clearly, and all of this has come out, and is well documented. These were stories that were spoon-fed to her by Dick Cheney and his minions, and then of course her running them unquestioningly as headline news. And without this type of information in the most prestigious paper in the United States, coming out, these types of stories on almost a weekly basis, building the drumbeat for war. It would have been a hard sell job for the Bush administration, but thanks to people like Judith Miller and Thomas Friedman of the New York Times,
exactly.
and of course, even many instances in CNN and the other major networks, it really made it possible.
So this is where you came into the picture as an independent journalist. What did you do before that, and then what prompted you to very much go to Iraq and witness everything and write about everything that you saw?
I was actually living up in Alaska for several years before the build-up to the war in Iraq. I was working as a social worker when it wasn't mountaineering season, and then when summers rolled around, I was working as a mountain guide and a volunteer rescue ranger for the Park Service up on Mount McKinley. But watching the media in this build-up that we're talking about to the war, I, like millions of other people in this country, were just absolutely shocked and horrified by what we were seeing, and that this war was actually going to take place, thanks in large part to the media. And then, of course, once the invasion was actually launched, we weren't seeing war. We were seeing something like a weapons manufacturer show, or something more akin to a video game, or a football game telecast, the way it was being broadcast. We weren't really seeing any real images of what war really looks or feels like. And so I realized then, there was a total failure in the media, and we weren't getting any human picture of how the war was affecting people in Iraq or U.S. soldiers really. And so I decided I would go over and see it for myself and write about what I saw.
You wrote in your book, Beyond the Green Zone, that dispatches from an embedded journalist in Iraq. By the way, you were unembedded. Have you ever been embedded? This is a term that very much has seen daylight for the first time. Embedded. That means that you travel with a given group of people, and then you report based on what they do. Correct?
Correct. So in this instance, I embedded myself with the Iraqi people, where I made a conscious decision not to do any reporting from the military perspective. We had more than enough of that in the mainstream media, so I decided intentionally to go daily into Iraqi people's homes and go about with them and go into hospitals and report specifically from their perspective.